Now we're just searching for another obvious war of choice for absolutely no strategic reason. 90% of what Washington, D.C. does is illegal. Every war since World War II has been illegal. Donald Trump is, this has always been the problem with him. He's totally a slave to what anyone around him is telling him is the truth.
Dave Smith just explained why Trump seems always itching to go into a new war, this time in Venezuela, flirting with regime change there. And in this clip, he discusses why this problem goes far deeper than Trump, and it's become entrenched in Washington foreign policy, regardless of the president. So let's get right into this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
What do you make of today, once again, Secretary Hegseth coming out and saying, we got him, now up to around, what, like 35 deaths?
Oh, man. Well, I mean, look, obviously, I'm completely with Rand Paul and Thomas Massie on this. And of course, they're being targeted because, you know, whenever there's anybody who's opposing the warfare state, AKA the state, always, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, just always in search of the next war. It's such a like sickness in our society. I mean, just the way we've just accepted permanent militarism and permanent war, and that we would even be thinking, you know, like imagine Emily, that we elected, right, in the late winter of 2000, or the early winter, I should say, of 2001. We elected to not just fight al-Qaeda and try to take out their cells in Afghanistan, but that we were going to engage in a regime change war against the Taliban. And that took us 20 years. For 20 years, we occupied Afghanistan, trying to overthrow the Taliban. And at the end of it, we left with the Taliban better armed than the Taliban who we started trying to overthrow in late 2001. And then months after, finally ending the longest war in American history, with troops still in Iraq and Syria and Somalia and all over the place, right? Like, not like we didn't have other conflicts still going. Then we get into backing the proxy war in Ukraine. And after the years of that, Ukraine's going to get a worse deal than they would have gotten if they had just made a deal at the very beginning when we started backing them. And then, of course, in the middle of that, we decide to back Israel's destruction of Gaza and just fund them all the way through that, turn global opinion against us and Israel, and lead to all types of instability domestically, politically.
Yeah, it's always about lucrative ventures for the military-industrial complex, no matter the theater. If you ended the war in Afghanistan, you had to open up a new one, more lucrative, this time more risky for the American people, by having a proxy war versus the nuclear power with the biggest stockpile of nukes. Dave's exactly right. The Israel first mentality. This is so entrenched in Washington policy. It is the default for U.S. foreign policy. Can you even call it a foreign policy to just default to military operations, coups, regime changes, proxy wars every single time? That's what the U.S. does. And Dave's right. In Afghanistan in particular, they spent trillions of dollars. Hundreds of thousands of lives were destroyed over the course of 20 years. 4 presidents, I believe, to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. That's exactly what Washington does. This is no different, flirting with regime change in Venezuela. That country, like all the other countries in my lifetime, will not be left in a better condition after this, and it will never pay a dividend for Americans.
And now what? We're just looking for now that we might have a ceasefire that's maybe sticking like the loosest of loose teeth, like by one thread over in Israel and Gaza. Now we're just searching for another obvious war of choice for absolutely no strategic reason. I mean, just, you know, total nonsense that they're saying about, you know, whatever it's about drugs. Mm-hmm. It's like nobody even Venezuela isn't the problem when it comes to drugs.
Not when it comes to fentanyl.
Yeah, not when it comes to cocaine either, just minuscule amounts. It's all propaganda designed to overthrow this regime like Marco Rubio's always wanted. This is not a drug problem for the United States. Not that I think you should go around bombing random countries, because cartels within those countries operate in many cases outside of the purview of that government. You should just regime change all of those governments. Why isn't the U.S. regime changing Mexico? Don't get ideas, feds. But that's the case. That's the truth.
Yeah, well, and well, certainly not when it comes to fentanyl at all, but just drugs in general. I mean, it's not like Colombia and Mexico, and there's obvious, everybody knows this, and not that it would make sense to attack any of those countries over it either. But if it's a strict fight, like you said about the law, like, and I guess this is my like libertarian insight on this, but the thing about the law is that it doesn't exist. It's not real. It's all a figment of our imagination. As what people go, it's like when someone goes, when you see one of those YouTube videos or something where there's a police stop and someone goes, "I know my rights." Like, do you? This is an idea. Reality is that there's a man with a gun outside your window right now, and the courts are probably going to take his word over yours. So that's great that you have something written down. Listen, if you look at the Constitution, I mean, I bet you've read it once or twice. It's actually very clear. The Constitution expressly says that any authority that has not been explicitly delegated to the federal government is left to the states and the people. It clears that up. Okay. 90% of what Washington, D.C. does is illegal. Every war since World War II has been illegal. The only legal war is if Congress declares a war. It's not, so legal is all fugazi,
Yeah, he's exactly right. In Common Sense, Thomas Paine, who I wrote a biography on, said, "In America, the law is king." He was promoting this idea, and the idea inherent in that statement is that this law is applied equally, regardless of whether you're entrenched in power in government or not. But that's not the case in the United States. You can clearly see it in regard to war powers in the Constitution, where every war is undeclared since World War II. And there's no legality for these military operations where the president can wield more powers than an 18th century monarch that the founders were trying to inhibit in the creation of our own American executive office. Not whatsoever. And Trump's not the only one that's perverted this, hardly so, but it's become so precedential in American politics with so many precedents leading into this that the courts and Congress just don't push back on it anymore. And that's the big problem with legal precedents in general, that unless you resist exertions of tyranny at the very start, they sit and become precedents for all time.
Like it's not real. Well, look, if you're speeding, right? Like let's say you're in a 65 and but they don't pull you over unless you go over 75. Then the speed limit is 75. Doesn't matter what the sign said. You're allowed to go 75, and then there are repercussions. The law is, when are there repercussions? Well, when are there repercussions for an American president? I mean, it seems to be, as far as I can see, when they maybe start saying they might end some wars. That's illegal.
That is illegal to the Washington regime. He's exactly right. This is the key libertarian red-pilled insight that Dave's getting at here, where they'll impeach you for specious reasons, for Russiagate, for the idea that you're colluding with Russia when you're sending weapons to Ukraine, when you're withdrawing from the INF treaty, when you're condemning Russia for giving Snowden safe haven and slapping sanctions on Russia. They'll still say, you're colluding with Russia in the United States. But the second you talk about ending a war, that will bring down society if you're an entrenched DC elite, a war maker, a neocon, a deep state operative that wants these wars going on endlessly forever. He's exactly right about that.
Like if you say you're going to end some wars, they might frame you for being a Russian spy. See, that's actually illegal.
Yeah.
Ending wars is illegal. Starting wars is totally legal. In fact, it's incentivized.
Yes, it's tough logic, but it is how we are governed. I think you just landed on your memoir title, by the way. Legal is all fugazi. That's pretty good. A memoir by Dave Smith.
It's not the worst.
It's not the worst, but actually, so Trump, speaking of Ukraine, Trump authorized more escalation, more weapons to Ukraine just this evening. And I want to roll this clip of Steve Bannon talking about this very fragile peace deal in Gaza, because all of this, the strikes on the alleged cartel boats, which the administration, again, it sounds so quaint to talk about. They just are not supplying information even to Congress, which is why Rand Paul is pissed, to justify these strikes. It does harken back to Obama drone war eras, which conservatives have been critical of. So all that happening against the backdrop of escalation in Ukraine and peace in Gaza, fragile peace deal in Gaza. But as Steve Bannon explains it in this clip, he believes that the CIA was essentially trying to undermine Trump's peace process. Let's go ahead and roll S4.
Witkoff is briefed 3 times a day by the CIA, and they lie to him. This is not some marginal mistake in intelligence. He sat right there. They lied to him 3 times a day. Hamas doesn't want to do the deal, never going to do the deal. That's the Mossad talking. That's Netanyahu talking. Ratcliffe should resign today, or let's just have a congressional hearing, right, on national television, and let's just put it out there exactly about what you told these people in this negotiation, and let's go back to what you told the President of the United States about the beginning of the 12-day war, because that was a lie also, as now we know by the Times of Israel putting out the cabinet minutes of the war cabinet of Netanyahu. They were 2 years away, not 2 days, not 2 weeks, 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's hard to deny. I'm totally with Bannon on Ratcliffe deciding to resign, but it was Trump that appointed Ratcliffe, probably at the insistence of Miriam Adelson, by the way. He's a total pro-Mossad, deep state shill, responsible for expanding FISA 702, warrantless surveillance over Americans, more than any other American probably in Congress. But look, this CIA is different in Trump's second term than the first term. In the first term, it was consumed by Russiagate, this deep state coup against the sitting president, again, for specious reasons, not legitimate reasons, like he exacerbated the war in Syria, put boots on the ground there for the first time, used one of his only presidential vetoes to expand the war in Yemen. No, not those reasons, specious reasons, Russiagate. Well, this time he got to appoint the CIA director. And he got to do it when he's not under the cloud of, a deep state attempt to remove him and displace him from power. No. Trump deserves culpability for this, too. He's totally complicit. He doesn't have to take the CIA line and start new wars that contradicted all of his best campaign pledges.
Okay, Dave, what do you make of Bannon's claim?
Well, I mean, it's it's interesting that tracks right to me. I know I've read at least a couple pieces over the last 2 years by Ryan Grimm. Ryan Grimm, you familiar with him?
I've heard of him. He's
handsome young fellow,
handsome young man, jihadist like Zoran.
He's a jihadist, but he's got a real future, much like Zoran, real future on both those jihadists. But he's had a few pieces about this, and I know Jeremy Scahill, they've interviewed him a few times about where Hamas is and what they're willing to do. And there's been reports over the last few years that Hamas is actually very willing to make some of these deals that almost any normal person would look at and be like, hey, that's actually they're willing to do that. Okay. Oh wait, you're saying from the beginning of the war, they were willing to give up all the hostages and relinquish power. Okay. That seems pretty good. And of course, then you've seen all this contrary, claims out of DC that no, Hamas won't negotiate and all this stuff. And then it was pretty interesting to see both Jared Kushner and Witkoff, Witkoff, say what you will about him, he clearly seems to kind of be a different figure who's in the middle, who's been trying to, negotiate peace here. But Jared Kushner is Jared Kushner. I mean, this is the Jewish family friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, who was essentially viewed as the Israel shill who came in and messed up the whole first Trump administration. Even he's saying, yeah, Hamas was totally willing to negotiate as soon as we talked to him, despite the intelligence we were getting. And I do think.
And not only that, he was more critical of the Israelis, who he said their arms had to be twisted more to accept the ceasefire, despite all the propaganda we heard about how Israel just wants to get their hostages back. And not only that, it's Jared Kushner, the devout Zionist, that said it looked like a nuclear bomb had gone off in Gaza when he had seen it. That so many people had died. This isn't, this is no different than what was said by the whistleblower Anthony Aguilar and the GHF project that said it looked like an apocalypse zone. This is Jared Kushner saying that. Of course, then he's like, but no, there's not a genocide, though. Of course he said that. But this admission is telling, and I think Dave's onto something there.
I think that This is I think it was, man, I'm sorry, it's late and I'm drinking a whiskey, but I'm pretty sure it was Daniel Ellsberg who had written about of course Daniel Ellsberg, the famous, whistleblower who broke the Pentagon Papers. I think he had written about the top secret clearance syndrome that people get into when they're in DC, and you kind of feel like, ooh, I have this special information, which is the top secret information, right? Like so I know stuff that nobody else gets to know. I'm kind of special. Obviously, there's a human, thing that feeds into, but then you almost get caught relying on the top secret stuff that no one else gets to know about, and then you're very ripe to be manipulated, and you're not necessarily reading Ryan Grimm's latest article or reading Aaron Matei's latest article, Jeremy Scahill's latest, so you're not actually reading like the good journalists who are breaking the information. You're going to the CIA, and then
Yeah, that's the deep state ploy to control presidents and control our government, and it's done regardless of who the presidential occupant is. The deep state doesn't have a tribe. Yeah, people are partisan, but they operate in the same way to exert power, start wars, and, propagandize psychological operations on the American people. What do you think Operation Mockingbird was? What do you think MK Ultra was? What do you think warrantless wiretapping and COINTELPRO to infiltrate dissident movements were? Do you think that's stopped today? It hasn't.
And, just imagine how much worse this problem is with someone like Donald Trump, who never reads anything anyway.
It's just if it's not on Fox, it didn't happen.
Well, that's right. I mean, look, I make this joke all the time that the real issue with Donald Trump is that he's never read a book about anything. There's not one topic he's read a book about. And I don't know if you ever saw there's an old clip, I think, on Crossfire, where Pat Buchanan asked Donald Trump what he's reading. Like, it's like back in the day. Donald Trump's just a private citizen, and he's like, so what are you reading? And just watching Donald Trump struggle, trying to answer what the last book he read was. So Donald Trump is, this has always been the problem with him. He's totally a slave to what anyone around him is telling him is the truth.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. Trump shoots from the hip. He's not exactly an intellectual. He's easily twisted by those around him. But at the same time, if you go by that mantra, if that's your entire view on Trump and your entire analysis on Trump, he escapes some of the culpability or responsibility for some of his worst policies. And I know that Dave isn't doing that. Dave has been very critical of Trump, especially in this second term. And, that's just the truth. This is how Washington operates. But Trump got to select the people around him. It wasn't just Ratcliffe. It was the Secretary of State, the most powerful position in government outside of the president. And not only is that Secretary of State a neocon, he's also the National Security Advisor now, because the previous neocon occupant, Mike Waltz, stepped down or was fired. That is the case. There's so much influence by deep state supervillains in this administration, despite all the best campaign promises of the Trump campaign. How much he dragged neocons like Liz Cheney in the last months of the campaign. It sure does seem to be indistinguishable from neocon foreign policy to flirt with regime change in Venezuela right now. When you were the peace president, the peacetime president, boasting about that. He came to the Libertarian Party and said he would not let the neocons run his second administration. And all this word about how, he surrounded himself with bad people like Pompeo and Bolton, but now he's learned that lesson the hard way. No, he clearly has not learned that lesson. But that doesn't take away his own culpability. He does seem to be pliable in the direction of the neocons. We know that because he's out there endorsing Lindsey Graham. That's his first pitch to endorse in the midterms, and dragging great patriots like Rand Paul and Thomas Massey that have the indignation toward Trump for betraying all of his best promises. No, they're the ones that need to be ousted, primaried, etc. Trump talks about it constantly, but no, neocons like Lindsey Graham, they're just fine. That's what we get from this administration. But I do want to hear from you. Is Dave right? Is this why Washington's always itching for new wars? Is this why we always get them, regardless of the president? Let me know down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Emily Jashinsky. Great interview. She always does them. If you like this video, please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below, helping to support the channel, and in return, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. Also, if you want a free copy, a digital copy for free of my book, Compact of the Republic, click the link below, libertyvault.net, go right there, and I'll send it to you in your email, perfectly free of charge. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.